Hello everyone, it is Marc Sabatella from Mastering MuseScore, and welcome to the MuseScore Café. So this is my regular Wednesday series where we talk about some aspect of creating music using MuseScore. And so we will talk about the ins and outs of using the program to do various different kinds of tasks. And usually most weeks I have a particular theme in mind, and this being the third Wednesday of the month by my count, means, and yeah, it's the third Wednesday. The theme is a score, a particular score that I'm just going to enter. And it's, not a full score. I'm not going to enter an entire symphony or something, but it is a very famous opening line, one particular part that actually gets to look at a whole lot of different issues. You'll get to see how I handle various different things in MuseScore. And let me make sure I've got my chat popped up here. So I'm following discussion. By all means, I love it when people introduce yourselves and let me know where you're coming from. That's always great. So the piece that we're going to be looking at is one that I posted earlier. And this is kind of the routine I want to be getting into, by the way. So the routine is at the beginning of the month, I'm going to post what that score is to the community. And specifically, it's going to be here in... Yeah, now I need to figure out where I actually put the thing other than where I have it now. Ah, here it is. It's going to be in the notation projects space. For anyone who's in the Mastering MuseScore course, you'll have access to this, and I will have the excerpt there that I want us to work on. And my thinking here is by having lots of people work on this piece already, you're going to get some practice. I can be giving feedback. I can see in advance what problem spots are going to be. And then you can also see what you struggled with, or maybe what you didn't think you struggled with, but maybe weren't doing as efficiently as possible. And then when you watch me do it, you'll go, oh, yeah, there's something I should have done that way. Or maybe you'll say, hey, I found this other way of doing that thing, and you'll be able to share something with me also, and therefore with the rest of the community. So that's kind of my thinking here. And this is the piece, and this is an excerpt, the beginning of the Rite of Spring by Stravinsky, and it is the bassoon solo at the beginning of the Rite of Spring. And it is definitely one of the more famous orchestral excerpts in the world. I suppose it would have been useful if I had already queued up a recording. If someone wants to post that into the chat, y'all can do that. Someone look up a recording of it to post into the chat and post a link, and then people can check that out on their own. So you can just hear this opening bassoon solo. But looking at it, you can see all sorts of stuff that we're going to deal with, right? For one thing, tenor clef. That's what that is. We're going to have grace notes. We're going to have ties and slurs. Well, these are both slurs. These are slurs within slurs. Here's a slur within a slur within a slur, right? And there's tuplets here. There's a 5-tuplet, triplets here, nested triplets. This is a triplet within a triplet. It's crazy the number of different things going on just in this first little excerpt here. So what I'm going to do is start entering this, but rather than starting with the actual entering, I want to start with the process of setting up to be able to enter things. I don't know, maybe a year ago, I demoed this using MuseScore 3 and showed a particular process that could work involving documents side by side within MuseScore 3 and then taking a graphic and pasting it into an empty score. It was pretty clumsy, but it worked. Well, that particular clumsy method doesn't work. So we're going to need a different clumsy method for MuseScore 4. And actually, I find this to be a better method, and it works with MuseScore 3 too, but it totally depends on you having a system that allows you to do what you're about to see me do. So what I'm going to do here is I've got this graphic that I'm displaying here. And what I'm going to do is separate this out into a new window. And this is Chrome that I'm using. I think most browsers are going to have something kind of similar. And then in Chrome OS, you have the ability to make a window be floating like this. Floating means it continues to appear even while you're working with other windows. So this is going to allow me to keep seeing my excerpt even while I work with my score. So this is, I think, a pretty good method of working. And there's, depending on what you're actually making float like this, different systems let you do it differently. You might have different options for sizing what's in there and so forth. And I'm not going to worry about that because those details are going to differ for everyone. But it's kind of nice because now what I can do is flip over to MuseScore, have MuseScore open, and have my excerpt. Now, the one thing I can't do is float two windows at a time. So I'm going to have to keep flipping back over to the chat periodically to make sure that I don't miss any comments coming in here that I'll need to see. And yeah, so nested triplets, triplet within a triplet is definitely a thing. But Marla, you know this piece, you know it's not about metric precision. This is a very expressive line. It even says tempo rubato, right? That means, you basically play it freely. So it's not about the precision of playing a triplet within a triplet, but that is a thing, and in other cases it is. So what I'm going to do, now that I have that window floating here, I'm going to go ahead and create a new score. And what I'm going to do is, I'm going to do it by creating an orchestra score and then going to the bassoon part. Lots of ways I could do it, but why not? Let's pretend I'm eventually going to enter the whole piece. So in MuseScore, I'm going to hit Control-N to create a new score. And by the way, I am very hoarse. My throat is not cooperating with me this week. I'm going to have all sorts of fun sight singing tomorrow, so we might need a plan B on that. We're going to see where my voice is tomorrow. And then I'm going to say Create from Template. And under Orchestral, I'm going to pick the Symphony Orchestra. Now, this particular instrumentation here is unlikely to match Stravinsky's instrumentation exactly, and that's okay. We could always add or remove instruments later. But I'm not going to worry about that right now. So I will put in the English title here, The Rite of Spring, and I will enter Igor Stravinsky as the composer. And one reason to do this right away, I don't emphasize this often enough because so often I get ahead of myself and just impatient to start entering notes and I skip this whole screen. The advantage of entering the title and composer and information in this screen is that then it gets stored in your score as metadata, and it will then be available when you export to other formats or when you upload to MuseScore.com. If you don't enter it here, we can enter metadata later. I'll show you how to do that in a second. But it's nice to get the information entered up front. So I'm just going to call it at that. I'm not going to worry about everything else. And I put in C as the key signature, but that's not actually correct. 4/4 is the time signature, but C as the key signature isn't quite correct. At least I don't think it is. Someone who knows this score better could tell me for sure, but I suspect it's written with what's called an atonal key signature, meaning all instruments, like I don't think the clarinet parts show 2 sharps. I don't think the horn parts show 1 sharp or anything like that. I don't think there's key changes in here. I think it's all notated with no key. I don't know that for a fact, but I'm going to assume it's true for now, and so I want to make sure you know how to do that. I could have done this in that wizard, but again, I'm impatient and I just moved on. When you're selecting a key, instead of the C major key signature, pick the atonal key signature over here. It's the one with an X through it. The X won't show up in your score. It's just there so that in the palette you can tell the difference. And now you'll notice the clarinets have lost their sharps. We haven't suddenly switched into concert pitch, but the atonal key signature means even transposing instruments will show no key signature. And that is a typical way to write atonal music or music that's close to atonal. Like some people would argue about whether Rite of Spring is tonal or atonal. Not interested in that argument, but I am saying from a practical perspective, showing key signatures might not be that useful. And I see, by the way, I'm going to keep flipping back to the chat. Someone's posted a nice link to a recording. So yeah, by all means, just listen to that. You'll hear the first, 15 measures or so, whatever it is. You'll hear that bassoon solo. So what I'm going to do, now that I've created the score, So I'm going to go to parts, and I'm just going to say open all to open all the parts. And then I will go to the bassoon 1 part, which is the one that I want. Bassoon 1. I think I clicked the wrong place. Let's try that again. Bassoon 1. There we are. So since I'm going to enter this music directly into the part, normally I don't do that. Normally I would be entering music into a score because I'm writing a score usually. What I'm doing here, copying one part only, I don't do very often. So if I knew it was only going to be the bassoon, I might have created my score for just bassoon. But if I think I might do other parts also, then I would still start with the score and then go to the bassoon part. But now I'm going to press M to turn off multi-measure rests. Okay, so I'm going to do that. Man, my voice is really not cooperating, and I apologize if I'm hard to understand here. So I'll try to maybe not talk quite as much as usual once I start entering notes. I'm just going to enter them, and you can follow along. But I know I need to narrate too. So I've got my bassoon part in here. It's 4/4. I need to get that starting clef in there. So one thing that I've often pointed out is when I'm composing, like for viola, which uses alto clef, I don't read alto clef well enough to want to compose in alto clef. I will compose in treble clef, or treble clef with a little 8 on it, so everything is an octave down, so everything fits on the staff nicely. I'll compose in a clef I can read well. But I'm not composing here. I'm copying a part, right? And by the way, I'm going to be jumping all over the place as usual. One of the reasons why this might come up is it's part of the job of an orchestra librarian. Okay, thanks, Dean, for confirming that it really is the atonal key signature. And I've got the score somewhere around here too. A common thing, there's a job called an orchestra librarian. Every major orchestra in the world pretty much has a librarian. And their job isn't just like, they're not just a file clerk. They are actually responsible for doing things like, let's say the bassoonist, moves to some other country and takes music with them. And then suddenly the orchestra is without the bassoon part to this, and maybe the person has lost it. Maybe it got lost in the luggage. Maybe they spilled coffee on it. Maybe it burned in a fire. Who knows what? It might be the case that you need to basically create a new bassoon part, and you've got the rest of the score, but you just need the bassoon part. Or maybe the bassoon player and the flute player were roommates, and the fire destroyed both of their scores, and you need to recreate both of their parts. So this is something orchestra librarians do on a fairly regular basis: is recreate parts that have become unreadable for whatever reason. Or maybe they're doing a special version of it where they're going to cut out everything from, from rehearsal number 5 to rehearsal number 12. They're just going to cut that section out. And so they want to create a new version of this that has those measures removed. Or it's a piece where there's a vocalist, and the vocalist has what I've got going on right now, and they're like, I can't hit the high notes today. We're going to need to take this whole thing down a step. And then they need to produce a new version of Nessun Dorma, everything down a step. Torrendo is playing at Opera Colorado this month or next month. So anyhow, that's a little background on why you might need to do any of this. So when I'm composing, I was talking about the clef. I'm not going to try to mess with tenor clef, but I don't read tenor clef well enough. I know that first note is a C. How do I know that's a C? Because it's like one of the most famous notes in orchestral literature. Right? It's that's the line, and it starts with that high C. It's a very famous opening line, and I know it's a C. So I don't have to count ledger lines or read tenor clef to know it's a C. But after that, I'm not going to read this very well at all. So I'm going to do something I almost never do, which is use my mouse to enter notes, because I don't have to know what notes these are to be able to enter them. So I'm actually going to use my mouse way more than I normally would. So anyhow, I've got my bass clefs selected. I'll add the tenor clef, and now I'm going to start entering notes, except I can't yet. I need to deal with all these time signature changes because I don't want to try to add time signature changes after the fact, right? Once I start getting the notes in, you can change time signatures, but it's going to break up notes across, right? Notes across bar lines that need to be connected by ties and so forth. All that's going to change. So you need to get the time signatures kind of set up first. So it's a bar of 4 and then a bar of 3. So select, click the 3, 4, and then a bar of 4, and then a bar of 2. Is that what it says? Looks like it. And then a bar of 3. And then I have my double bar. So I'm actually going to put that double bar in there because it's going to help me remember where I am. Furthermore, I'm actually going to put in the line breaks where they have them here because that's also going to help me remember where I am. So 2 measures on that first system, 3 measures on the second system, hit the line break, and then it looks like I get to ride with the 3, 4 for another measure. And then there's a 2, 4. Go back to my time signatures palette, enter my 2, 4, and then another 3, 4. So, in the same way that I said, atonal key signatures are used for music that's truly atonal or just music that's loose enough that key signatures don't make sense. The same could be said for time signatures. This piece isn't really changing meter. It's just free. So it's more like he's drawing in bar lines to indicate beginnings of phrases, but it's not really like it feels like it changes time signature that often. Other parts of the piece do, but this part of the piece is really more about freedom. But in order to make it add up notationally, he had to do it with all these time signature changes, so that's what I'm doing. And I know I'm not going to get any further than this, or it's unlikely that I will. So I'm just going to go that far. I've got the first 3 systems worth of time signature changes and double bar lines and system breaks. All right, so I'm going to get my notes in now. So it's a quarter note, 5, and I know that's a C, so I can type a C, and I'll turn up my volume so you can hear these notes as they go in, raise it up an octave. Now, from here, I can't read, so I'm going to start resorting to mouse entry, which I don't normally do, but I'll still use the shortcuts for duration. So 3 for 16th notes. I actually know these pitches because I know the line well enough that I can kind of sing it to myself. And so I'm pretty sure that's a B, and then this guy's probably a G, and this guy's probably an E because that's kind of coming down, and then it goes back up to the same note it was just on. Whoops, and I missed, and that's one reason I don't use mouse entry because it's kind of inaccurate. But I can use the arrow keys to fix that. So I've got those 16th notes in there. This idea that I'm not necessarily reading the pitches so much as following the contours of it. This is also a big part of sight singing. It's also a big part of recorder playing, and I'm again going to be all over the place here, but I have an alto recorder and a soprano recorder, and these are pitched differently, such that this note here, all fingers down, is a C on the soprano, but on the alto, it's an F. It's a C here, but it's an F here. So you have to kind of learn different fingerings for the different instruments. And when you're reading music for alto recorder and you're more used to playing soprano like I am, if you're not an expert in this, you tend to use little crutches like, oh, I can just tell that's an arpeggio. And then you just move your fingers in the arpeggio pattern without necessarily needing to think about what all the notes actually are and what their fingerings are. I'm kind of using similar techniques here. Okay. Next thing I have is a triplet, right? So it's an 8th note triplet. So the total duration of it is quarter note. So I'll type 5 for quarter note, then Control 3. And now I will click in my notes. It's that note on the ledger line above, because now I've completely lost track of where I'm at pitch-wise, so I'm going to resort to the clicking. The note on top line, note 2 ledger lines above. Oh, I skipped. I totally skipped a beat, right? I totally skipped a beat. So undo, undo. Let's try that again. It's the note, a ledger line, and a space above. And then back up there, and then here. And I missed again, so it's here. Another triplet, so 5, control 3, and now ledger line. And now I have just ordinary eighth notes. So it's ledger line and space, 2 ledger lines. Missed again. I'm missing a lot because I just don't use, I could zoom in more and hope to get more accurate, but frankly, I just am not good at mouse entry because I don't do it much. And then this guy, and then this guy up here, and then this guy here. Okay, so I now have the basic notes for the first system entered, right? Now, I say the basic notes because I don't have the grace notes yet. I didn't bother entering them right away. To be honest, if I were doing this with keyboard entry, I'd have been much more likely to enter the grace notes while I was going, as opposed to going back to add them later. But because I know keyboard shortcuts for adding the grace notes, but having to add the grace notes via the mouse is just a little like disruptive to me to go over to the palette. And yes, I could switch back and forth between clicking and using grace notes, but my mind was starting to explode from reading this, and my throat is just absolutely driving me crazy. So anyhow, I didn't get the grace notes in. So let me get them in now. I'm going to leave note input mode is I think going to be the easiest way for me to do this right now. So then I can just click the note where I want to add grace notes. And I need 2 of them, right? So now if I zoom in the original version here, you can see these grace notes are written without the little slash. These are written without the little slash, meaning they're written as appoggiaturas rather than accicatoras, to use the Italian terms. MuseScore is going to want to make a distinction between those that doesn't always apply. I'm going to enter them. I guess I'll go ahead and use the grace notes palette just so we can see using this, because this way I can enter them as 16th grace notes. So I'm going to enter one and then enter another. The second one is higher than the first. The first one is the same pitch as the final note, so that's correct. The second note, I need to be higher, so it's going to hit the up arrow. Oops, move the cursor to the second one, move the up arrow. And now I will do the same thing to this note here. I'm going to enter 2 little grace notes, one, and change its pitch, and then add the other one. Nope. When I change the pitch, it also, I'm trying to like come up with the most efficient way of entering multiple grace notes and affecting their pitch. And I never remember when I enter multiple grace notes which one is selected. I don't remember. I just, move an arrow and then, I selected the wrong one, or I zoom in more. But in any case, this guy here needs to go back down. And then I'm going to have that exact same figure on the exact same note right over here. So let's see if I can get it right this time. It's this note. I'm going to enter one and then the other, and then hit the right arrow to select the second one and then up. I guess that's the efficient way to do it. Now notice the grace note at the end does have the slash through it. So Stravinsky at least is doing something to indicate that he is making a distinction. What he is really indicating is not for me to say. The traditional distinction is the ones with the slash through them are meant to be played as fast as possible. It's always as fast as possible. The ones without the slash are meant to basically split the time with the note that they are that they are attached to. So if you have a single note without a slash, grace note without a slash attached to that note, they would basically be played as 2/16. As it is, this is almost like it's another triplet here. This is like 3 notes. I don't think that's what Stravinsky is saying, but that's the traditional definition of appoggiaturas, is they would split their duration with the main note, whereas these guys with the slash, the acciaccaturas, are as fast as possible. So the as fast as possible one has a shortcut, it's slash. But now I need to move it down, and again. And by the way, I'm moving it down in half steps because I'm lazy, but I know there's a shortcut that will move down diatonically. It's Alt-Shift down, or on my keyboard, I had to customize it to Alt-Shift left bracket. Nope, Alt-Shift left bracket. There it is. Because on my keyboard, Alt down is a synonym for page up. And again, I'm going to flip over to the chat. Yeah, more water. Yeah, you're right. Yeah, tomorrow I'm almost certainly going to need to find a different, might have to have a guest host for music masterclass or something. So that's that measure. That system notes, but I'm still not done because there's a number of other things to do. Like one is, well, there's a tempo marking, and I never entered the tempo marking when I first created the score, so let me do that now. It's Alt-Shift-T. And it enters like some number. Whoops. Did I accidentally enter 2? I don't know. So what, did you notice that when I entered that tempo marking, there was like one tempo marking and then the cursor was sitting above it? I'm not sure what happened there. I might have accidentally double tapped it, or there might have been an extra tempo marking. So I'm going to see if there's an extra hidden tempo marking right now. I'm going to use Alt left and Alt right to navigate around. I select the note, press Alt left, and notice that selects the key signature. Alt right selects the note. Alt right again selects the tempo. Alt right again selected one of the grace notes. So no, there's no hidden tempo markings. That's great. So I will now select this text and type lento. Oh, here's another thing. Let me just do that again. Yeah, there's that tempo marking. Right now I have kind of a invisible tempo marking, but if I press F2, I get my edit back and I can start typing. What happened was, and this is true in both MuseScore 2 and 3, tempo markings use special characters, right? The note characters come from a different font, and so depending on how you edit them, you can end up editing in the wrong font. So when that happens, depending on what happened, you just try again, is what I did there. So lento, tempo, rubato. And curiously, it doesn't look like the tempo marking avoids the grace notes. I didn't know that would be the case, but apparently it is. I want to go to the properties panel, make sure I didn't disable autoplace accidentally, and I didn't. But now I'm going to start entering some of these other markings, the fermata and the slur and so forth. So correcting note position with mouse, as in like dragging the notes up and down, that works. It's a little dangerous, and I'll show you why. If I drag this note down, it actually changes the pitch, right? However, if I accidentally double click it and drag it, well, there's cases in which, depending on how you drag things, you might get into situations where you're only dragging the appearance of the note, but not changing its pitch. I think that was something that happened in MuseScore 3, and in MuseScore 4, they said, no, we're not having any more of that. And they changed that so you wouldn't accidentally drag a note head without changing its pitch. I think in MuseScore 4, it's much harder to accidentally do that. But in MuseScore 3, it was a pretty common problem. All right, so I've got my pitch here. I'm going to go to the palettes now and add in the fermata. And the fermata used to be under articulations, but now it is under breaths and pauses. That's just got moved there, in part because the word pause is a typical term that's actually used for the fermata. And so people often look for the fermata under the breaths and pauses palette because pause is often the term used for that thing. In the United States, not so much, but I'm told that's true in the UK. Those of you who are from, parts of that part of the world could let me know if that's something you find to be true or not. But in any case, the fermata is under breaths and pauses. So now I click to add that, and luckily the tempo does avoid that, which solves my grace note problem. And now I want to get in some of those slurs. Actually, let me go ahead and put in that other fermata while I'm at it. The other fermata is on this note here. So get that one in. And no other fermatas here. By the way, you'll notice I don't have a plan. I kind of do notes first, then markings. And when I'm adding the markings, I tend to do like with like. Like while I'm adding fermatas, I'll add fermatas. While I'm adding grace notes, I add the grace notes. While I'm adding dynamics, I add dynamics. Some people just work from left to right, getting everything as they go. That works too, right? There's not a right and a wrong about it. I probably do things differently while I'm demoing than in real life. I think in real life, I'm less likely to just stick with fermatas. But once I've started talking about fermatas, now I really have fermatas on the brain. And I start looking for more fermatas I can enter. And there's going to be one at the end of the second system, but I haven't entered the notes yet. So yeah, I'm just going to stick with what I got here. So the next thing I want are my slurs. And I can see that there is a slur across those grace notes, which is pretty common, right? If I press a slur on that grace note and then shift right to extend it, that gets that set of notes slurred. And then on this grace note also, press S to add it, shift right to extend it. And the same for the others, press S to add it, shift right to extend it. Now you'll notice in the original, those slurs are all above, right? The slurs are on top of the grace notes. MuseScore defaults to putting them below. Is one more correct than the other? Is one more right than the other? I think the above is more common. But there's probably good reasons for doing it here, and I don't really know. But this is the sort of thing where I would probably, if I were doing this for my own purposes, not mess with it. I would just let those slurs be below. However, I don't like how they're colliding with the ledger lines. I think if that whole passage were an octave lower, I would be more likely to leave it where it is. But I don't like how they're colliding with the ledger lines. So I will press X to flip it above. What I don't know is if that happens automatically when I add the other slurs, though. So I'm actually going to undo that and find out. So I'm now going to add the slur between the two fermata notes. So it goes from the first fermata note to the second fermata note. So I'm going to click one, shift click the other, and press S. So that added that slur, but it didn't flip that other slur. But I'm not done yet, right? So I'm gonna get the other slurs. I'm gonna enter my slurs before I start fiddling with them. That's gonna be my policy here. So my next interior slur I need is from that high note to the first note of that measure. So click, shift click, press S. And then the big slur that I need is from this note back to the beginning. Slur within a slur within a slur, right? So that situation of having slurs within slurs within slurs is not super common. It's not something you would ordinarily encounter. And frankly, it's not one I would recommend very often. I'm not convinced there's a whole lot of value to this, but it is what's there, and I'm certainly not going to mess with that. What I am going to need to mess with now is, because under normal circumstances, the rules for which things get placed above which things make sense. In these special cases where, we have slurs within slurs and things on top of triplets within triplets, once you get into complicated cases like that, the normal rules you might need to bend a little bit. So I'm going to need to do things manually here, like take those interior slurs and go ahead and flip them up, the grace note slurs. But also notice the fermatas. The fermatas were cleverly tucked underneath the slur. This one wasn't just tucked underneath it. It was just said, hey, let's just collide with them, right? This guy is just out and out colliding with those slurs. So I can make that happen. The way I'm going to do that is by selecting that thing, that fermata, going to properties and turning off autoplace. Now I can freely position that fermata and allow it to collide with things. You don't have to disable autoplace every time you manually adjust things, but you do if you want it to be able to collide with things like this. So now that I've moved it, I'll press F2 to put it in edit mode, and now I can move it with the cursor keys. That's my recommended way of moving things. Now, you could look at the original and say, hey, look, Stravinsky, no, not Stravinsky, the person who typeset this chose to have this slur actually intersect all the way in, but the outer slur doesn't intersect all the way. It stops a little sooner. Yeah, I'm not gonna like try to reproduce every single engraving decision that particular editor made. I just want to get the basic positions of things the way I want them. So if you try to take this slur, this fermata, and move it up, you can do that without disabling autoplace. If I move it down, hey, look, I can do that. I forgot. I actually implemented this. I should remember more about how it works. But you can create certain types of collisions without disabling autoplace. I never disabled autoplace, and MuseScore did allow me to move that fermata down. So that's good to know. So this time, instead of dragging it, you all should know I hate dragging things. I hate it because A, it's inaccurate. It's hard to get it to line up perfectly horizontal, to get it to come on the exact same vertical as I move it, as I drag. But also I like precision. I like to make sure that if I need to make that same adjustment somewhere else, I make it the same way. So I'd rather press F2 to put it in edit mode and then arrow it down. And notice what this editor did. He moved it closer to the note head, and then he did stop the slur short. Let's see how to do that. I'll take that slur and then I'll select that handle. And then again, I'm going to use the cursor keys to just move that handle to where I feel it looks good. Would I do that for real? I don't know, but I wanted you to know how to do it. So, yeah, let me come back to the chat, see if I'm missing anything else. Isn't the longest slur a phrasing mark? So yeah, Dean, you're absolutely right. I mean, when you have slurs within slurs, slurs for wind instruments have a very specific meaning of being, what you do with your tongue. Ta, right? If I go, that was all slurred, versus ta 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 ta. I don't know my alto fingering, and I don't read tenor clef, so I'm surprised I did as well with that as I did. But anyhow, that's just because I know the line, and I've just basically faked it. But that's the difference between slurring, and tonguing. It's what you actually do with your tongue. But then there's this more broad notion of phrasing, which has to do with how you breathe, how you feel the notes at some level. So at some level, even though he's telling you to tongue, to slur these notes, don't use your tongue until you get back up to that note, then you use your tongue again. So he is using the slur to indicate tonguing, but then he's using a bigger phrase marking to indicate something else, something bigger about the phrasing, how you should feel the music, how you should interpret this in your rubato phrasing. The grace note slurs mean something else entirely. They're just a thing that goes with grace notes. You would normally slur grace notes because it would sound stupid to go ta-ta-ta. So it's normal that you're going to slur grace notes, whether you write a slur for them or not. But it's common to write the slur ending on the main note, even if you're supposed to continue slurring after that. So that is pretty common to see that slur within slur if the inner slur is a grace note, because that inner slur is going to stop on the main note, even if the line continues being slurred after that. But as far as the big phrasing mark and why it's written the way it is, Stravinsky's trying to suggest something to you about how to feel the music. But it's it's more loosey-goosey in terms of what it actually means, right? The tonguing versus slurring things is very technical. This is more interpretive. So I've got all that stuff in there. What else did I miss in the first measure? There's solo ad lib. So notice that text is below the staff, but written in plain font, like not italics. So I have my choice. What I'm going to do is type Control-T to type some text, and I'll type solo ad lib period, and then escape, and then X to move it below the staff. MuseScore by default will put staff text above. Expression text, which is typically things like dolce, things like that, are italics below the staff. Control-E will do that. So Control-E will give you that expression text and put it below the text, but it's going to put it in italics. And this wasn't supposed to be in italics, so I just used staff text and moved it. Now, he does have con la parte in italics here, and it's sort of a not really true italic font. It's kind of just a slanty font, right? I don't know what that means. Can someone tell me what that means? With part? No, one is it? Yeah, I don't know. I wish I could tell. Can I move the 3 for the triplets above? Yeah, I can. So this 3, I could totally just select it and press X to move it above, and select that one, move it above. And then again, if I don't like the collision, MuseScore is normally pretty good about avoiding collisions. But again, when you get really complicated cases, there are certain collisions that it doesn't know how to resolve well. And so this is one of them. I'll press F2 to put it in edit mode, and then I can use the up arrow to adjust that. The rule for triplets is normally that the 3 goes on the beam side. And the reason is beams are where we read rhythm, right? If you've got 8th notes and 16th notes and combinations of them, the way you can tell the difference is by looking at the beam. So the 3 normally goes on the beam side. And yet, from a practical perspective, sometimes it just looks better to put it on the note head side. So you will see people do that, even though technically it really belongs on the beam side. And that's probably changed over the years. Like 100 years ago when this edition was created, maybe people hadn't really figured out so much about let's keep the triplets on the beam side, in part because before Stravinsky's day, rhythms didn't tend to be that complicated, frankly, right? You didn't have triplets within triplets and stuff like that. I shouldn't say starting with Stravinsky, starting with Chopin, starting with Romantic era composers, Chopin, Debussy, people like that, are when you started to seeing these crazy rhythmic things. And so gradually over time, as those rhythms started to get more common, that's when the modern rules for how we're going to notate rhythm to keep things readable, that's when they started to develop around Stravinsky's time. Okay, so let's see. Did anyone manage to tell me con la parte means solo establishes the tempo? All right, I totally believe you based on what I know about the piece. I'm a little curious as to the actual literal translation. One reason that I'm wondering is, do I want to consider that to be expression or technical? That is the distinction that I'm going to make. It doesn't sound like expression. It sounds like a technical instruction, something you're telling people this is what to do. Follow the leader, right? So I'm going to call it staff text, Control-T, as opposed to expression text. So I'm going to enter that with another Control-T, con la parte, and then I will just use properties to make it italic. And for text, I don't have to use F2 to put it in edit mode. I can just start moving it with the arrow keys right away. And I can kind of move it to where I think I want it. And, I normally wouldn't like fine tune, worry about the positions of these things so much right now. I might, deal with that later. But whatever, I want to make sure that we're dealing with all the various notations that we have here. So next I've got a short slur that goes from that first grace note to that note there. Now notice when I did that, I selected the first grace note and then I shift clicked the last note. Range selections won't include leading grace notes. And so if I press S right now, oh, but it did do the slur correctly. And so I got lucky. But normally, it's going to be the case sometimes that a range selection won't allow you to add the slur you want. Here, I wanted the slur to go from the grace note to that note there. And if you want to connect from one grace note within the middle of a passage to another grace note within the middle of another passage, or if you've got multiple voices and you've got a note in one voice and you want to slur it to a note in another voice, the trick for that is going to be control click. So I'm going to click that first note, control click the other. If you have exactly two notes selected, S will always connect them, regardless of whether they're grace notes or in different voices. So that's going to be kind of your ace in the hole for creating unusual slurs in cases where just doing a range selection doesn't work. Here, I'll just press S, and notice it went to the grace note, but Shift right will extend that. So at this point, I think I actually have everything for that first system. Yeah? Now, I took a long time doing this, right? I've been working on this thing for 45 minutes. But that's because I'm talking about what I'm doing as I'm doing it, right? This would have taken me, 5 minutes tops if I'm not sitting here talking. And I said I wasn't going to talk, but you knew that was like impossible. And also not good, because I know some of you are like, basically treating this like a podcast, right? You're hearing me. And actually, I'm curious about that. Let me know in the chat. How many of you typically put the cafe on in the background and then do other things like wash the dishes or pay bills or do things in other tabs on your browser? How many of you are typically only hearing me and not seeing me? Obviously, I know a few of our blind members are, typically participating in these cafes. And so obviously, my narrating what I'm doing is crucially important for anyone who's blind. But I'm curious how many other people typically listen more than you watch. So Chris Allen asking, when you turn off automatic placement, are there consequences if you change the pagination? So that's a good question. Possibly, but typically, as long as you have an element connected to the thing you want it connected to, you're okay. Like I disabled automatic placement for this fermata here. If I drag this thing all the way over here, like to another measure, I can do that with automatic placement disabled. But now what's going to happen is, let's say I try to put a page break after that first measure. Where's that fermata now? It's in some weird place because it's physically the same number of inches from where that note was, but it's no longer the right place, right? I had moved that fermata. Where the heck did I move that fermata to? Is that this one? Yeah. I had moved that fermata to be on top of this other high C here, but as soon as I added, even if I add just a line break, that fermata is in the same physical position on the page relative to that note, but it no longer makes sense. So I'm not going to say that's because of disabling of automatic placement. It's because of moving something too far out of position. So don't put a marking on one note, then move it to make it look like it's on another note, because yeah, that is going to look bad as soon as the layout changes. So try to keep markings within their zones, or that's how I would put it. So I'm going to reset that one, and when I reset it, I reset everything. Okay, let me undo. I had a range selected. I didn't want to do that. I want to select just that pesky little fermata there and Control R it. When I do that, it resets automatic placement again, which is fine because now I know I didn't need to disable it. I can just press F2 and cursor it down and get it about where I want it and call it good. And let me just check the responses in the chat. So yeah, so I think I certainly design these cafes to be things you'd watch, and especially for the cafe where it's about demoing in MuseScore, I expect most people who are able to are going to try to watch. But I wonder about the music masterclass, if that sometimes works just as well orally. I have done one session where I made it just be that, right? Where I didn't do anything on screen. We just had a black screen and then it was just oral. I want to do those more often, by the way. Okay, so Acciaccatura needs a slur last note. Thank you. I'm going to get that. Okay, I see that I've missed a few other things. So let me get that. So Dave's. Oh, there's that little slur. So this one he does have below. I think he really was, whoever the engraver was, really was just afraid of the. Oh, that's because I've got that system break in there. Let me delete that. Delete. What did I just do? Oh yeah, that's the break I want. So this is the Acciaccatura, and it should have a slur, and it goes below. So yeah, I think he flipped these above because he didn't like how it looked colliding with the ledger lines. This one he allows to be below because it's not a problem. So what else have I missed here? Moving the 3, and so here's what happened to the triplet arms. Oh, okay, the triplet arms. So by arms, you're talking about the bracket. So let's talk about that here. The usual rule for tuplet brackets is use them if and only if there is not a beam connecting all the notes. If there's a beam connecting all the notes, you don't need the bracket. That's the norm. So if you see a 3 and no bracket, the beam is your bracket. That's the normal rule. However, like in this nested case here, look at this. He put the bracket on the outer notes, but didn't put it on the inner ones. That's because then it would have been unclear. What does this 3 occur? What does this 3 apply to? I think he should have done it on the inner ones also. I think they should have had it be both ways. Anytime it's at all unclear, you need the bracket. So the normal thing is to avoid clutter. Don't add a bracket if all it does is duplicate what's on the beam. So that's the rule MuseScore follows by default. But you can override that. So I can select that triplet, and then over here in properties, where it says bracket type, just select the thing. And now I got my bracket, right? Or go back to auto. So yeah, you can force a bracket to appear in places where MuseScore doesn't want it, or you can force it to disappear in places where MuseScore does want it. So good question there. With the part. Okay, now I get it. With the part. So people should follow the part. With the part. Yeah, that makes sense. That does make sense. Okay, so colla parte with the part means people follow the leader. Yeah, okay. I get the intent of that now. All right, Acciaccatura needs a slur, and I think now that might be the only thing that I missed there. So good. So I think I've finished with that first system, and I'm just about done here time-wise. So I do want to take a look at my thing. I'll make it a little bigger so I can see it a little better, and just ask myself, is there anything else that's particularly interesting? I want to do that 5-tuplet, and I want to do the triplet within a triplet, and I want to add the rehearsal mark. All right, so let's get the rehearsal mark. That's easy. I'm going to select the first thing in that measure, which is the rest, and Control M and type 1. Now notice the same thing happened that happened somewhere before. Somehow when I'm entering that, I'm getting like 2 boxes, and I don't know why that's the case. I don't know what's going on here. Probably has something to do with the fact, it probably has something to do with the fact that it's adding it to the score and the part at the same time. So that's kind of annoying as hell. So I think things like rehearsal marks and tempo marks are better entered in the score. But again, I'm going to select that time signature and use Alt-Right, and I'm going to try that again. Control M. No. Huh. Yeah, I don't actually know what's going on here. And what's going on is I've frozen. So I guess I'm done entering things in this score. That's fine. Let's just create a new score for a moment here. Let's see if I get this one back. Just so I can show those few things without complications. To enter a rehearsal mark, I'm going to select a note or a rest and press Control M and say 1. By default, it's got a square box around it, but if I go to the Properties panel and then click where it says More, you'll see I can change that to a round thing. So now I have my 1 there. How about that 5 tuplet? The 5 tuplet is going to be, I'll type 5, not because I want a 5 tuplet, but because the total length of that is 1 beat, right? 5 is the shortcut for quarter note. Now I'll press Control 5 to create my actual tuplet. So Control 5. Let's make sure I've got my focus in here. Let me get back in here and try that again. Control 5. Huh. All right. So things are deciding not to work at the moment. But how about if I go to the tuplets and say, oh, look at that. Oh, yeah, I redefined those shortcuts. I redefined some of my shortcuts to allow me to do figured bass. So that's what's going on. So instead of using Control 5, that would normally work, but I defined some custom ones, so I'm just going to use the quintuplet on the menu. And now I can type my notes. And I know that that's a C, and then I can put in my other notes. How about the triplet within a triplet? In this measure here, I had a quarter note, and then I want basically another quarter divided into thirds, so 5 for quarter, Control 3 divide into thirds, enter the first note there, the C. Now the next eighth note is itself divided into thirds. So I'm going to press Control 3 again, and now I'm going to get a triplet within a triplet. And then I can enter 4 for the final note, and then B flat. And I'm pretty sure those are the right pitches. So triplet within a triplet. And yeah, notice how it didn't put, it's trying to put both the triplets on the beam side, and that's not really what we want. We want the outer one to be below. So, I'll take one of those triplets and flip it below. Right now, I don't know which is the inner and which is the outer because they're both missing their brackets. So I'm going to turn on their brackets. That's the inner one. And here must be the outer one. And I'll press X to flip it below. I actually want to see the bracket in both places here. And of course, the stem is on the opposite side because it's a different clef and these notes are all stemmed down. I mean, the beam is on the opposite side, but if I move that an octave up, it'll look more like what you're looking at here. Okay, so those are the things that I knew were coming that I hadn't gotten to yet. So hopefully that helps. And yeah, I wonder if I ever got my this thing back. No rotor net. No. Yeah. So, yep. I had temporarily gotten myself into some weird mode where things weren't working in here anymore. But everything's normal again. So don't know what. Temporary glitch in the system. All right. Anyhow, between feeling like I've now covered what I want to cover and between my voice saying, please stop talking, I think I'm going to call it good at this point. Oh, no, I'm not. I got to play this thing, right? Because we got to hear this. Oh, that tempo marking, lento, that's too slow. I'm going to put a more reasonable tempo in here. That's not how that is really played. So under properties, I'm going to turn off follow written tempo, and I'm going to just enter 8. Oh, I actually edited at one point to say 8. Remember that? I'm going to make it say 60. And let's see what that says. Oh, it's still playing super duper slow. Follow written tempo, override written tempo. So sometimes when you change a tempo marking, it doesn't take effect right away. So what I'm going to do is just delete that sucker and not worry about it. Oh, it's because I've got 2 tempo markings in there. Remember that? I accidentally had 2 tempo markings at one point, and one of them was messing things up. Plus, there's the fermata. All right, so it's going to be that way. Anyhow, we're not going to get to hear it because of my weird tempo situation. So yeah, I think I must have an extra tempo marking in here that got added at some point, even though I'm not seeing it. somehow MuseScore thinks there's an extra tempo marking in there, and so it's trying to play it too slow. So I'm not going to worry about it. We're just going to listen to cafe music. So try again. All right, hope you all got something out of this. I showed a whole lot of different things, and my voice more or less kept up. So we'll see how I do tomorrow. You know, because ideally I was going to be doing some sight singing, but you guys do the sight singing. I'll just give you stuff to work on, and I'll say, here, do this one. So tomorrow will be in the music masterclass. We're now dealing with major scales and keys in the basic music theory cohort. So that's what we're going to be looking at in the masterclass the next couple of weeks, things having to do with major scale and keys. And that's going to include things like sight singing, major key melodies. I'll talk about a few other things also as we're at it. So yeah, it'll be not just about the sight singing, but expect that we'll do a fair amount of that, and we'll just talk about the process and try to give each other pointers. I know some of you are probably more accomplished sight singers than I am, so hopefully we can all help each other out. Next week's cafe, don't know what the topic will be. I'm always up for suggestions, but I know one of the ones that's come up often and is near the top of my list is producing worksheets, like ones similar to my basic music theory worksheets. So at some point soon in the cafe, I will do that, and maybe it'll be next week. So anyhow, see you all next time, and hopefully my voice will be doing better. I feel okay. It's just my voice is worse than it sounds. All right. See you all next time.